So this morning in the keynote, Stefan gave already a very short, or now to Holger, a short introduction or whatever update on the community development. And this whole conference is obviously about what is happening in Flink, but more on the technology side of things. That's why I submitted a short talk to summarize what is happening in the Flink community. And I first thought to have like a timeline and go over the events one by one and talk about each event. But then I realized that there are actually two main themes that were happening in the Flink community in the last year, more towards the second half of the year. And I'm going to summarize these two main streams. So one is the integration of the Chinese-speaking community, and the second theme is coping with the growth of the Apache Flink project. So for integration of the Chinese-speaking community into Flink, I would first like to measure a little bit the size of that community. And if I look at the amount of traffic that we have on the flink.apache.org website, Google Analytics tells us that by a very small margin, but still, most of our visitors by now are coming from China. That is more than the US, which is known for being a very large technology market and a fairly early adopting technology market. So there must be something going on in China with Flink. And secondly, there are two DingTalk groups, and they created a second group because the first group probably hit the limit of 10,000 members. So there are 13,300 members in two DingTalk groups, which is like the Slack of China, with people asking questions about Flink. And you can imagine that a group with 10,000 people is quite hard to follow. It's like a waterfall of text. Another indication of the size of the Chinese community is the number of people attending events. So meetups in China have sometimes more than 500 people participating. So they basically have more people or the same amount of people coming to this conference. And Flink Forward Beijing, which happened for the first time, initially broke all the records with over 1,000 participants. And there will be another Flink Forward Beijing. Let's see which records they will break this year. And it's interesting to observe that there is this huge community that is fairly unnoticed here in the Western world. And I believe this is partially due to the separation of the online communities. So for each Western portal, there is an equivalent or another website that is popular in China. For Facebook, for example, most people consider WeChat an alternative, even though it's very different. For Twitter, there's an alternative, and so on. So the community is basically living in different spaces. I personally think that we should try to bridge these two communities to utilize the full power. So if you look at GitHub, at the trending projects, you see that there's quite a few very big projects, apparently, that are basically unknown here in the Western world. And I would like that Flink is a community that is able to integrate these two worlds and benefit from all the engineering power and all the knowledge that is available in these two big communities together. So the community is basically developed separately due to language and access barrier. And in early 2017, the Flink community started an effort to provide infrastructure to welcome the Chinese-speaking community within Flink. One benefit is that there's more visibility for this community within the broader foundation. So if we see that mailing lists get a lot more subscribers, or we have more GitHub stars, we have more activity on the mailing lists, then this gets noticed within the ASF, within other projects. And secondly, we also allow the Chinese community to learn the Apache way, to learn to communicate via mailing lists, to learn this consensus approach in the dev list, and so on. And this allows the Flink project, again, to source new committers and PMC members to help facilitating the growth of the community. So one very practical things we did is that we migrated an independent website called flinkchina.org, which was basically a translation of the Flink website and a translation of the Flink documentation, onto the Apache infrastructure. So now on the Apache Flink website, you can switch to the Chinese version of the website, and also on the Flink documentation, you can switch between the languages. There's a flip 35 that defines this process, and also some processes that we have enabled or implemented for opening Jira tickets, for translating pages for non-Chinese speakers, for the translation. And the second big thing that we launched is a Chinese-speaking user support mailing list, so that people can slowly move away from WeChat and DingTalk groups towards infrastructure provided by Apache. And the results so far, so we have translated most of the Flink website. As you can see here, for example, the Powered By page is now translated, and also most of the other architecture pages and so on are translated. The documentation is still work in progress, so only the navigation and some high-level pages are translated, but some of the detail pages are still missing. And it's also like an ongoing effort. Whenever we change something on the English-speaking side, we also need to translate again. Like the roadmap document is updating every few months, and also we recently reworked the contribution guidelines, so all this needs to be translated constantly. The Chinese-speaking support mailing list is picking up in the last 3 months. So these red bars here indicate the number of emails sent per month. Another big achievement is that more and more Chinese companies are being added to the Powered By page. So you see some names that you also probably know in the Western world popping up, and these are really big, important companies that are using and also contributing back to Apache Flink. So I would say for the integration, we are on a good path, but there still needs to be more efforts. The other big theme of the last year within the community was coping with growth. And I would also like to quantify the growth first. So the upper chart is the number of the page views over the last 5 years on the Flink website. And if you look closely, you can see that basically from September last year, we were at like 75K visitors or so, and now we are reaching 150K page views. So you can see that the Flink community, the growth has actually sped up. You can also see, interestingly, that this drop here is probably Christmas in the Western world, and this bigger drop in the beginning is Chinese New Year. So you can actually see, you can actually map events to the number of page views. And I'm also curious to see how the national holiday, a 7-day holiday in China last week, how this affected, again, our website statistics. You also see on the dev mailing list that the activity spiked in the recent month, just in terms of number of messages. We can also look at the Flink code base, where you see that the number, the lines of code, excluding comments and so on, has increased quite a lot since the last year. This is partially due to the merge of the Blink SQL runtime into Flink, and also other Blink merges in the Flink runtime itself. So what problems do we have in Flink due to this growth? One is that the build system is overloaded. So Flink, so basically ASF has a Travis account that the ASF is also, the Apache Software Foundation is paying for, and Flink is using 25% of all build time on this Travis account. And even though we're using that many resources, we still are at the resource limit. So we still have to sometimes wait for quite some time until pull requests are automatically verified. And also our build itself, even though it's highly customized, is hitting the limits of Travis. So we would have to further parallelize and build our own custom tooling into that. So it's not a nice experience, and we need to put a lot of custom tooling into fixing the build system. So there are several solutions under discussion in the recent month in the Flink community. One is splitting the Flink repository. So basically, for example, splitting away connectors or machine learning library and other higher level projects into separate repositories. probably within the ASF. This effort is currently on hold due to too many concerns. The problem is that we couldn't really agree on a model of how to do versioning, how to do releasing, how to do documentation, and how to do all the tooling for such a repository split. Another related effort is that we are launching a Flink ecosystem or packages website where people can publish their third-party projects. Because this basically gives ecosystem projects more visibility, and the need for people to contribute into Flink is a little bit lower. So we hope that this also helps us to shrink the Flink code base to the bare minimum, to the core of the project. We are also discussing moving away from Maven, potentially to Gradle, to have better parallelism and incremental builds and also test execution. And there's currently an ongoing proof of concept within the community. And we're also looking into moving away from Travis to more powerful machines. The other growing pain is the contribution experience. So when I did these slides, we have 550 open pull requests. And the average age of these open pull requests is 289 days. And the average time for resolution of a pull request is 28 days. So we have done a few things to mitigate the situation. One is that we are growing the number of PMCs and committers very actively. I would say that this goes in line with the growth of the code base, so I don't think that it's really helping to reduce the number of pull requests, but it's a step in the right direction. We've introduced a more formal review process for incoming code changes. This is assisted by Flinkbot, and the main idea of this more formal review process is that we are separating different aspects of a change. So we first look at the relevance and the architecture fit before we look at the code itself. And also we've introduced a stricter overall contribution process that requires approval on a JIRA level first. So we're basically moving the back pressure earlier in the process, not to the pull request review stage, but to the consensus or JIRA approval stage. This is an idea, this process. I wouldn't say that it's fully implemented. So people need time to learn this. And another thing that we've introduced is a new extensive coding guideline that includes a lot of experience that we've collected over the past years on how to write good, stable, extensible Java code. This helps us to just point people at this guide instead of rewriting the same issues over and over again while reviewing pull requests. And finally, our processes in the community are not very well defined, and we were also not, they were well defined but not followed. So for example, we had a guide that said how to handle flips, Flink improvement proposals, but people were not following this definition. So there were no votes on flips for approving them. And while this might be okay as an informal rule for people that are long in the community and know how things work, it is quite bad for newcomers to join that want to join the community, because for them it's not transparent how things work in the community. And we have discussed and approved what most Apache projects have in place much earlier than us, and that is called bylaws. And these laws define ground rules, how the project is working in terms of voting, merging, releasing, and so on. So these bylaws define on when do we vote on what. And also we have discussed and implemented improvements on the flip process. And one of the, let's say, positive results of this is that for the 110 release, there's a lot of discussions on the dev mailing list on many flips. On the other hand, this is also a problem because we need to see how we handle all these flips. So that's basically what has happened community-wise in the last year in Flink. And now I'm happy to answer any questions in the remaining 4 minutes.
Anyone want to ask some questions?
Yes?
Do you translate your documentation manually? Like, do you rely on volunteers to come and update in Chinese and?
Yes, the documentation for our website and documentation is manually translated. Yes. I mean, we have some tools for for handling the multi-version stuff with our documentation build system, but the typing happens manually. And there has been a proposal in the dev mailing list for machine translation with a project from Google. Yeah. All right. If you have any other questions, you can also come to me after the talk. Thank you.